Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'm going to be sharing my thoughts regarding the third season of Fear the Walking Dead. I've only recently sat through the entire series to date for the first time, so I thought I'd share my feelings on the show. As per my previous video in which I talked about the first two seasons, even though this is a review type video, I won't be going through every single episode in a huge amount of detail, due to the fact that it would simply take too long. Instead, I'll just be giving my opinions on the season as a whole. There will be spoilers for the entirety of Season 3 throughout this video, so consider yourself warned. Anyway, let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. I mentioned in my first video regarding Fear the Walking Dead that the positivity surrounding its third season was what ultimately convinced me to give the show another go. I've heard nothing but good things about Season 3, and I have to say my expectations beforehand going into watching it were set pretty high. Whilst for the most part I did enjoy the show's first two seasons, I still feel as though they didn't really set the world on fire. Season 1 was very hit and miss, and whilst the second season has a great start and end, it gets far too bogged down in the middle. Thankfully, I have to say that after watching the show's third season, I am in complete agreement that it's the best season of the show by far. And I know there will be those who don't agree with me when I say this, but I honestly enjoyed Fear's third season a hell of a lot more than anything The Walking Dead has produced over the last couple of years. In fact, I would place Fear's third season alongside my favourite seasons of The Walking Dead. It really is just that good. It certainly helps that the season kicks off in a sensational fashion with the fantastic season premiere Eye of the Beholder. Although Fear displays some messed up individuals during its first two seasons, there was never really a major antagonist or threat for our survivors to face. As soon as someone nasty was introduced, they were swiftly dealt with so the plot could move forward. Fear rectifies this by immediately introducing a band of heartless soldiers led by the charismatic Troy, who try to kill Nick and his family almost as soon as they come into contact with them. Troy's soldiers spend their time hidden from the rest of the army camp as they partake in killing innocent people in order to record how long it takes for them to turn. It makes for some pretty brutal viewing, seeing them murder helpless men and women without a care in the world. And the whole thing reminded me a lot of how Gareth and his cannibals were introduced in the Walking Dead episode No Sanctuary, which, with it being one of my favourite episodes of The Walking Dead, can only be a good thing. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the Clarks eventually manage to avoid being killed by the psycho Troy and have to escape the army base before it falls apart. Unfortunately, they have no option but to split up into two groups, with Madison and Nick leaving with Troy, and Alicia and Travis leaving with his brother Jake. In only the second episode of the season, Travis is shot and killed whilst in one of the helicopters, and I have to say I really didn't see this coming. It was a real kick in the teeth for me as I was just starting to like him. Even though I was a bit annoyed and shocked when it happened, this quickly subsided when I realised that Fear not only manages to do a much better job of justifying its character deaths than its sister show, but also makes sure that the deceased are replaced with characters who are arguably more interesting. When you look at The Walking Dead's decision to kill Abe and Glenn, the show ended up losing two really good characters, and as of yet hasn't really been able to replace them with anyone I care half as much about. Fear on the other hand killed off Travis, who had a pretty powerful story arc at the end of Season 2, and instead turned its attention to the Otto family, who I found to be far more engaging to watch. Honestly, by the end of the third episode, I'd already gotten over Travis's death because the new characters who were introduced were so fascinating. As well as focusing on the Otto brothers Troy and Drake, their father Jeremiah plays a big role in the first half of the season. Well, that is until Nick kills him. Yes, Jeremiah may be a racist and an ex-drunk, but boy is he great to watch. I love the method the show used to introduce him during the third episode. The opening sequence for said installment has an old VHS recording playing, which features Jeremiah advertising his ranch which he has prepared for the end of democracy, as you do. There definitely is a cult-like feel to the Otto community, and I adore the fact that this season has a lot of creepy vibes throughout. I mean, there's a scene in episode 5 where a guy is having his brains pecked by a crow whilst he is still alive, with the dude reciting a sinister sounding poem over and over again. In addition, there's also some very good sequences that take place in confined or enclosed spaces that set the viewer on edge. For example, late into the season, there's a scene in which Alicia and the members of the ranch community are trapped in a pantry with the oxygen quickly running out. As the oxygen fades away, people start dying and the dead start rising, all whilst Alicia is struggling herself to keep her eyes open and navigate her surroundings. This whole segment is a wonderful example of how to properly build up tension and fear, and on many occasions Fear the Walking Dead certainly justifies having the word fear in its title. Going back to the Ottos for a moment, I actually thought it was a very bold move to have the Clarks spend the majority of their time with them, especially when you consider the things they had done, Troy especially. During the final third of the season premiere, the Clarks managed to escape Troy with the help of his brother Jake and seem to be about to go on their merry way. Jake gives them some supplies to take on their way out, and at this point I thought I had things sussed. I was confident that the Clarks would leave and would come into contact with Troy and his group as the season progressed. Perhaps they would build their own community to battle Troy, or find another group that had been wronged by him who would join their cause. For me, in my head, that was the direction I thought the show was going to take. And perhaps if I was discussing The Walking Dead, this predictable kind of storyline is probably what would have happened. However, the writers genuinely surprised me by having Madison and her family live in the same community as the guy we saw responsible for organising the mass killings of innocents without a care in the world. The Clarks were forced to live with the enemy, and the show was so much better for it. The Otto Ranch is an extremely complex and fragile place, and I enjoyed the internal conflicts just as much as I did the conflict with Walker and his community, the Nation. I've mentioned Troy quite a lot already, so I feel I should go into why for me he is one of the standout characters of the season, and arguably one of the best characters in the entire Walking Dead franchise, period. When I first met him, I couldn't wait for Madison or Nick to kill him, and as you can imagine, I was pretty pissed that they decided to live side by side with him. However, as time went on, he quickly became one of my favourite members of Fear's cast. The guy is incredibly unhinged and makes for a great antagonist for much of the season. Almost immediately I picked up on the fact that there was something odd about him during the first episode, when he pleaded to Madison that he wasn't a bad person even though she never said he was, and the more the season progressed, the more it became evident that there is seriously a whole lot wrong with him. Take the example in the third episode in which Nick has Troy held up at gunpoint. Instead of panicking for his life, Troy simply asks Nick to kill him and record how long it takes him to turn in his notebook, because as he says, it's vital that he documents this. Now, although the sane majority would say that his actions in killing people and writing down their resurrections times was just plain sick and evil, Troy seemed to genuinely believe that his actions were justified. There was no remorse or regret on show. Instead, when his life was at threat, his only concern was if his potential killer would be able to carry on his legacy. Even more bizarre was his response when Nick decided not to kill him but instead rip up his notebook, to which Troy simply turned to Nick and said, "I think we can be friends now." To me, this felt like a really weird reaction to the situation, and this wasn't the only example of his madness being on show. When the Trimbles decided to leave camp due to feeling unsafe after Walker made his intentions to attack known, Troy chased them down and killed them all, even their young teenage daughter. When talking to Madison about it after, he tries to justify his actions by saying that Mike Trimble left without looking him in the eye, and that he owed that to Troy. It's almost as if in Troy's head he felt like the entire Trimble family deserved to die just because of this. Troy also tried to stage a one-man coup against the Nation, which almost turned into a suicide mission were it not for Nick being able to talk him out of it. And then when he was exiled for staging this sit-in shootout, he only went and stabbed the poor guy who transported him out of the camp. There's also many other examples of his sheer lunacy, but if I were to list them all, I'd probably be here all day. Simply put, he was off his rocker, but there's just something about him that makes him so interesting to watch. If you had told me when I was sitting through the first episode that I would be pissed at Troy dying, I wouldn't have believed you. I wanted Troy to die more than anything when I first met him, yet when his death did come via Madison whacking a hammer into his skull, it was kind of melancholic. Despite his craziness on display, there was always signs that there was some good in him, and it seemed like sometimes he just couldn't help what he did. He clearly never thought with a rational head, and it seemed like he only realised the consequences of the choices he had made when it was too late. After seeing the ranch fall to pieces due to him directing the horde towards it, and his brother die beside him, the realisation of what he had done seemed to dawn on him, and in this very moment I actually felt a bit sorry for him. It did seem that come the end of the season he may have actually changed for real, but I did feel this way about him many times before, only for him then to do something even more disgusting. Of course, I completely get why Madison killed him. When Troy admitted to her that he was responsible for the ranch falling apart, she came to realise that he was simply too dangerous to live and was a liability to have around. However, there was still a part of me that thought maybe he had really changed, when in reality I imagine given a few weeks he would have probably gone and done some other crazy, distasteful act. Being able to charm and convince people is the mark of a true psychopath, and Troy certainly managed to pull the wool over my eyes many times. I understand why he is gone, but that doesn't change the fact that I'll miss watching him. Anyway, going back to what I mentioned previously about the complex state of affairs at the Otto Ranch, I must say I am a fan of how Fear presented the two sides in conflict, the Ottos led by Jeremiah and the Nation led by Walker, as both being morally corrupt. Although both parties had their own arguments for why their cause was just, both committed some pretty horrible acts along the way. There's a big reveal halfway through this season that Jeremiah killed some of Walker's family members and buried them on his ranch after they intruded on his land, with this immediately causing Nick and Alicia to protest to Madison that they were fighting for the wrong side. It was easy to jump on Jeremiah's back at this point. Not only was he portrayed as a racist, but he had also killed Walker's family, so when Nick shot a bullet through his skull, as was Walker's requirement in order for the communities to live together, I thought that the real villain had been taken care of. However, once the nation settled in, it was clear that they weren't angels either. Walker decided to take control of the pantry and its supplies for himself, and the nation's soldiers attempted to also take control of the water. It seemed to me that they quite liked the idea of being in charge of the entire community. Let's not forget as well they also poisoned the ranch militia previously, and Walker did have a bit of a thing for cutting off people's scalps and leaving them to die. Both communities had committed atrocities and fear didn't shy away from that. If you thought that Jeremiah dying would achieve peace, then think again. Sure, the two communities shared the ranch together, but in reality no one was happy. Everyone remained suspicious of one another, with the two communities remaining segregated. Living together just wasn't going to work, as it seemed there had perhaps already been too much blood spilt. I really like the fact that after Jeremiah died, things weren't just quickly brushed over. The show could have had the two communities live in peace happily after his death. Think how the residents of Woodbury moved into the prison during season 4 of The Walking Dead, but that would have been far too simple. I would argue that the conflict that takes place after the nation and the ranchers live as one was just as interesting as the conflict that occurred before they found themselves side by side. Although much of the season's narrative revolved around the Clarks and their struggles on the ranch, they weren't the only characters who the viewers followed, with Daniel and Strand also both popping up when fear felt like a change of scenery was needed. First up, I want to quickly talk about Daniel Salazar. Now, in all honesty, I wasn't really a huge fan of him during the first 2 seasons. That's not to say I thought he was a bad character, I just didn't really connect with him and found him to be a bit dull. However, season 3 really went out of its way to completely change my opinion regarding him, and the 4th episode 100, which is one of the best of the season, was a catalyst for this. The dialogue throughout this episode is almost entirely in Spanish, and this entry focuses on Daniel's journey from when he disappeared during the fire at Celia's in season 2 to him ending up working for Lola at the dam. His journey is wonderfully presented, with him meeting some really colourful and vibrant characters, such as the Robin Hood-esque Efron who takes water from the evil Dante to give to the poor. Oh, and he does this whilst riding a push bike through Walkers with the word agua agua screaming repeatedly from a boombox at the front of his bicycle. Yeah, it's a bit crazy, but I loved it. What I loved even more was finally having Daniel's past reveal itself. Whilst this had been alluded to in seasons previous in the form of brief flashbacks, said flashbacks were never really coherent or detailed enough for viewers to really understand what had happened. Thankfully, season 3 expanded on this massively, and we learned that Mr. Salazar was actually a highly trained soldier who was part of an El Salvador death squad. In fact, he was so highly revered that Dante immediately knew who he was when he told him his name. I know it sounds strange to complain about realism in a zombie show, but I'll admit that sometimes when I'm watching the vanilla The Walking Dead, I can't help but notice how strange it is to see normal people acting like superheroes. I mean, the soon-to-be Fear crossover character Morgan seems to turn into the Terminator every time he's pissed off, and when he goes on one of his rampages, no one is able to get anywhere near him, which although admittedly is pretty cool to watch, it can come off feeling a bit silly. Daniel, however, as far as I'm concerned, can do whatever the hell he wants, because he has a backstory that warrants it. Want to have him in a room with 3 armed goons only for him to disarm them all and kill them without breaking a sweat? Yeah, why not, go ahead. Daniel is a badass, and because of how cool his backstory is, I can believe it when he's doing things that perhaps I would complain about other characters doing. I've also got to say he is one scary dude when he wants to be, which makes him even more compelling to watch. A scene that sticks out in my mind is when he interrogates Nick in order to find out how the ranch fell. There's just something about the way Daniel could immediately tell that Nick was lying, and the manner in which he coldly closed the door preventing him from leaving ready for questioning was very intimidating. I tell you now, I would not want to get on his bad side. Though I love what the show did with Daniel, Strand on the other hand was a bit of a weak link for me this time around. I grew to like his character a lot during the 2nd season, but his constant knack for stabbing people in the back and attempting to screw people over just annoyed me. He was still a pretty interesting character to watch, I'll give him that, it's just I don't really like him at this moment in time. Speaking of someone I don't like, I'm afraid I'm going to have a bit of a moan about Madison. I was waiting and waiting for me to suddenly to open up to her, but it just didn't happen. I just find her to be a bit boring, and whenever she's on screen I find myself thinking that I would rather be following Nick or Alicia. Madison was also in my mind to blame for a lot of the horrible events that occurred during the course of Season 3. If she hadn't have lied and instead told the truth about Troy killing Gretchen and the rest of her family, Terrence wouldn't have attacked a member of the nation, which ultimately caused Walker to take over the pantry and cause things to escalate between the two groups. Also, if she hadn't have panicked and insisted that Troy go get Alicia back from Walker when Alicia volunteered to stay at his home during episode 7, then the parlay wouldn't have been broken and potentially a lot less lives would have been lost. As I've already mentioned, I really liked the ranch storyline and I enjoyed the conflict between the ranchers and the nation. However, at times it often felt like Madison was just messing everything up by acting too rash or simply making the wrong choice, which made it kind of hard for me to get behind her fully. I don't hate her, but she definitely isn't no Rick, and despite how much the show tried to make her seem like a strong leader by having other characters explicitly say how strong she was whilst bending over backwards for her, I'm still not really buying it. I just don't really care about her anywhere near as much as I do Alicia, Nick and Daniel. Lastly, the only other thing I can really fault with the season is the manner in which it ended. With the ranch falling to the Walker herd during episode 13, it felt like the narrative arc of the season had come to its natural conclusion. However, the last 3 episodes rushed out a new villain before making us wait until season 4 to see what happens. I didn't mind the last couple of installments set on the dam, but they really felt like episodes from a different season altogether, and it felt to me like things should have wrapped up a bit earlier. I also found episode 14, El Matadero, to be one of the worst of the season, with it seeming very out of place. I really didn't need to see Nick and Troy going on a drug-fueled night out, and it just felt at odds with the rest of the season. And in a season that didn't really feature much filler at all, this was it. Overall though, this review should only serve to add to the glowing response that season 3 has already got from critics and fans alike. After having such high expectations for the season based on what I had heard before going into it, there was always the chance I would come out disappointed. However, I found it to be a fantastic 16 episodes which featured some of the most interesting characters in all Walking Dead media. I know a lot of people may have given up with Fear after it didn't immediately hit the ground running, but I feel like those who haven't seen the latest season are really missing out on something special. Like I said at the start of this review, I enjoyed Fear's 3rd season a lot more than anything I have seen from a while from the main Walking Dead TV show, and I'm crossing my fingers that Fear doesn't self-implode in the upcoming season 4. If you have the opportunity, you really should give Fear the Walking Dead a try. So there you have it, that's my review of the 3rd season of Fear the Walking Dead. As always, please let me know your thoughts below. This video did take a bit longer to get done than I thought it would. I have had a really busy week, so thank you all for being so patient. I will probably be talking about my thoughts regarding the Morgan crossover in my next video, so I look forward to seeing you then. So until next time, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.